deciding on a public problem to analyze, I went back through my life to see if there was anything that affected me. There was always one thing that was more of a personal issue for me, and that came in the form of a question. The question was, what are you? What am I, referring to my race? I never questioned if my different races defined me, or if I looked different to others, until I started receiving this question more frequently. I didn't mind when people asked, because I was able to explain myself. But thinking back, there was one repeated situation that did frustrate me. This was because I was never given the opportunity to explain myself, and this was when I was asked to check one when it came to identifying my race. I remember, even in elementary school, coming across this part on a survey, standardized test, or doctor's form that directed me to check one under racial category. Do I choose Asian box for my mom or the white box for my dad? This presented an identity issue for me. Was I supposed to acknowledge my races? Did it matter? And most importantly now, was I being represented? I decided to do some research to see if my personal problem was indeed a public one. The definition of multiracial or biracial explains people who belong to two or more racial heritages. More people are choosing now how they want to racially identify themselves. Being able to self-identify gives the person the freedom to define themselves and be proud of their heritage. But thinking back to the check one box, do we actually have the power to do so? I went to research how people of multiple races are represented today, and if there were major changes made to racial collection. I was brought to the U.S. Census, and then the 2000 Census, the significance of this being it was the first time in history Americans could check more than one racial category to identify themselves as. The 5 categories that were used to determine the race of U.S. citizens were too broad to capture the growing diversity in America. In the 90s, a movement occurred where people of mixed race those wanting to represent their children and families of mixed race petitioned for a better way to allow people to self-identify. People felt overlooked and felt as though their true diversity was not represented. With these changes made in the 2000 census, there was a demographic switch seen. 7 million people chose to identify as more than one race, and in the 2010 census, 9 million identified as such. From 2000 to 2010, there was a 35% increase in multiracial identification. Why is this important? Data collection on race from documents like the census go into creating policy and legislation that affect numerous amounts of people. Collection of race can go into deciding funding for healthcare, education, and social services. It goes into the analysis of equal employment, racial disparities, and other civil rights protection legislation. Not allowing to correctly record their race causes misrepresentation of a group of people. Misrepresentation means a lack of data that is used to give support to groups who may need it. The inability to see race beyond 5 categories allowed us to create a group of invisible Americans. How now to find a way to represent this group is now a public problem. There is still a lack of standardization when it comes to collecting racial data. An example is healthcare. Providers still use outdated forms that use Check 1 to collect vital information from their patients. Accurate background data is important when scanning for certain diseases that affect different heritages or being able to find donor matches for blood diseases like leukemia. Multiracial people are said to be the new face of America. They are the fastest growing demographic population today and will change the notions of how we view and categorize race in our country. Pew Research says that 43% of people under the age of 18 are multiracial. 19 is the median age for multiracial people, where 39 is the median age for people of one race. In order to support the future of our country, we need to acknowledge this group of Americans and their challenges. There will be challenges in how we are able to classify people by race, or if we even are able to. It will teach us how to open our eyes to perceive race differently and understand what exactly race is in the modern world and today's society. Representation in policy is key, but how people are able to represent themselves in society is equally as important. There are many issues that multiracial people face every day that are not always realized. They often feel as though they have to choose between their races and can only be one. There is an internal conflict in how they see themselves and how society wants to see them, causing identity issues. How they see each other, how they see themselves and choose to be identified is all based on their own personal experience. Each person has their own multiracial experience in life, and with their own experiences come discrimination and acceptance. A big part of how society classifies race is based on one's appearance. Appearance is a factor in how one feels as though they can classify themselves and identify. Stereotypes and social pressure make it hard for people to understand someone may be more than just one race, and how the one person other races may not be acknowledged. Among biracial adults who are white and black, 61% say they are perceived by strangers to be just black. About 1 in 5 multiracial Americans, including about a third of all black mixed-race adults, have dressed or behaved in a certain way that attempt to influence how others see their race. This conflict of identity can lead to psychological factors like lower self-esteem, feeling of isolation, and even depression. This is a concern especially for younger children in school settings where race is not always talked about openly. A Stanford study also found that when multiracial and biracial people were able to freely identify with no social pressure, they were seen to be have more positive personal benefits from being multiracial than those who weren't able to. Children who grew up experiencing and talking about their race with their parents also saw positive benefits. They were seen to be higher achieving, have a wider cultural mindset, and can more easily adjust to different racial and cultural environments. With this being said, the ability to talk to our children of mixed race at an early age about the challenges and importance of their racial identity will let them thrive and create a better self-image. There is an ideology that everyone has to fit in categories that are socially constructed, and that race is absolute. There is a continual growth in diversity, and people are no longer going to fit or allow themselves to fit in these boxes. There is no easy fix to these issues, but keeping what we once knew is limiting us from a greater potential to understand. Learning how to better support and understand the multiracial community and their struggle not only brings a group of Americans out of isolation, but helps America to potentially be a more understanding community. I do not see my family or myself as a bunch of boxes or data, but humans and Americans who wish to identify themselves as they choose based on their own lives and experiences.